He had left that morning for a 2-day business trip. Nothing unusual. He did it often. I kissed him at the door like always brief and automatic, and as the door clicked shut behind him, I turned into the silence of the house with something between relief and guilt. I wasn't expecting any upheaval. The routine had become a kind of comfort. Quiet mornings, clean countertops, folded laundry, the scent of fresh coffee and wood polish. Then in the middle of that quiet, the doorbell rang. It was his grandson. Not by blood, adopted into the family years ago now, 25 and visiting for the summer. I hadn't seen him in years. He'd grown up taller, broader, with a slower way of moving, like he was always listening before acting. When I opened the door, he looked at me for a few seconds too long. Not out of disrespect, just a gaze that lingered thoughtful. It caught me off guard, but I smiled, told him to come in, made coffee like it was any other visit. The first evening passed without tension on the surface, but I noticed the way he looked at the framed photos on the wall or how he brushed his fingers along the edge of the hallway table like he was remembering more than just objects. I watched him from the kitchen, not deliberately, just out of curiosity. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes weren't. They were alert, noticing. Later, I stood in the hallway folding laundry, wearing nothing but a thin cotton robe, the kind I wore only when I was alone. I heard a floorboard creak behind me and turned slightly, expecting nothing. But he was there. I don't know how long he had been standing, and I didn't ask. He didn't apologize, just held my gaze in a way that sent a low, buzzing heat across my skin. Not lustful, not yet, but something awakened, an awareness. I could have pulled the robe tighter. I didn't. That night I lay awake longer than I should have. The hum of the fridge down the hallway felt louder than usual. The bed felt too wide. I thought about the way his eyes didn't flinch when they met mine. I thought about the skin on my shoulders, whether it still looked like skin worth seeing. Not once had my husband looked at me like that in the last 5 years, not because he didn't love me, but because routine had made me invisible. At some point past midnight, I got up for tea. The house was dark except for the glow under the kitchen light. He was already there, barefoot, leaning against the counter, sipping something warm. I paused, surprised, but he just smiled and asked if I wanted some. I nodded. We sat across from each other, hands wrapped around identical mugs, not touching, not speaking for a long moment. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was dense, like something old and unsaid had settled between us, waiting. "When did you stop painting?" he asked suddenly. I blinked. "I haven't painted in years." "I know," he said. "You used to keep your brushes in that vase by the window," he remembered. I don't know why that hit me so hard. My husband didn't even notice when I packed them away. The silence between us grew warmer, softer. He didn't move closer. He didn't need to. I felt the shift inside me without any movement at all. I couldn't sleep that night, and for the first time in years I chose my underwear the next morning, not for comfort, but for how it made me feel underneath my clothes. No one would see it, but I would know, and it mattered. The morning air carried a damp sweetness through the open kitchen window, the kind that seeps into your skin before you even notice it. I moved around the house slowly, deliberately, as if some part of me wanted to feel each movement deeper than before. The robe I wore was replaced by a lightweight blouse, slightly sheer in the morning light, and linen pants that clung gently to my hips. I didn't wear a bra, not because I was trying to be provocative. I just didn't want to. He was in the backyard, shirtless, hosing down the old stone patio. The sun had already warmed his skin to a soft sheen. I stood in the doorway, longer than necessary, coffee mug in hand, watching him, letting my eyes adjust to how he moved. My gaze wasn't clinical. I wasn't assessing him like a mother-in-law or a hostess. I was noticing, and I didn't feel guilty for that. We hardly spoke that morning, just exchanged a few casual lines over toast and eggs. But silence had taken on a new flavor between us. Charged, not awkward. I wondered if he felt it too, or if I was manufacturing something just to fill the ache inside me. Around noon, I carried a load of laundry down to the utility room, the quietest place in the house. The light there was softer, filtered through an old curtain, and it smelled like detergent and summer towels. I knelt to sort through the pile and reached for the soft cotton of one of his t-shirts. Then I heard footsteps. Not hurried, measured. He stopped just behind me. I didn't turn around. I felt him there, the warmth of his body only inches from mine. My breath caught not from fear but from the intensity of the stillness. My fingers held the fabric of his shirt, and for some reason, I didn't drop it. He crouched beside me. Our arms brushed a slow, deliberate contact. His skin was warm, slightly damp from the sun. I froze. My throat felt dry, but I didn't move away. "You always smell like oranges," he said quietly, barely above a whisper. "I used citrus soap," I replied, not recognizing my own voice. It came out lower, rougher. We were both still looking down. The laundry sat between us like an excuse. Our hands moved at the same time, reaching for a towel, and our fingers touched barely, but enough. Something cracked open between us too quietly to name. I looked at him then. Not a glance. A real look straight into his eyes. And then, without warning, he leaned in and kissed me. It wasn't rough. It wasn't rushed. It was curious, tasting. His lips were softer than I expected, and his hand didn't touch my skin, only hovered near my waist, like he was waiting for permission he hadn't asked for. I didn't push him away. I didn't even flinch. My body responded before I had time to weigh the consequences. When he pulled back, there was no apology in his face, no shame, only breathlessness mirrored in my own chest. We sat there for another second, then I stood up abruptly, my legs less steady than I'd like. I folded the towel I was still holding and walked out, not speaking. But I didn't feel dirty. I didn't feel guilty. I felt vivid. I spent the rest of the day in the garden pretending to prune herbs while my mind replayed the kiss in slow motion. Not because I wanted to relive it, because I couldn't stop. That night when I got into bed, I checked my phone out of habit. There was a message from my husband. Nothing dramatic. "Just miss you. Hope he's not driving you crazy." I typed a reply. "All's fine here." Quiet. I stared at the screen before hitting send, then deleted the message. Then typed it again. Same words. Hit send. It was a lie, of course. Nothing was quiet anymore. He appeared in the kitchen doorway early in the morning, just as I was pouring coffee into my cup. His hair was still damp from the shower, clinging slightly to his forehead, and he wore a plain t-shirt that clung to his shoulders with a softness that made me look longer than I should have. Neither of us spoke at first. The air between us felt too newly formed to pierce with small talk. "I'm supposed to go to a gallery exhibit in the city," he said finally, casually, like he wasn't carefully choosing the moment. "He bought 2 tickets, but he can't go. Asked if you'd go with me instead." He didn't look at me when he said it. He kept his eyes on the counter, running his finger along a water ring near the coffee pot. But I saw the tension in his jaw. There was nothing innocent about the offer, and we both knew it. Still, the words were simple, logical, practical. I said yes, not immediately. There was a pause just long enough to feign consideration. But inside, my answer was immediate and clear. The idea of sitting in a car with him for hours away from the safety of our routines made my skin buzz. I knew what I would wear, not something overt, a dress that held just enough structure to remind me I had a body worth dressing for. The drive was long, the highway flat and featureless. He didn't play music. I didn't ask for it. The silence between us felt intimate, not strained. At one point I reached for a bottle of water and our fingers grazed. Neither of us flinched. That alone said too much. "Were you always this quiet?" he asked, eyes still on the road. "I'm not quiet," I said, watching the fields blur past. "I just haven't had a reason to speak." He nodded slowly, said nothing else. He didn't need to. He understood. That's what drew me to him more than anything. His ability to hear the things I didn't say. The gallery wasn't large or crowded. It smelled like old wood and turpentine, and the paintings were raw, textured, intimate. I wandered between canvases while he trailed a step behind, occasionally pausing to comment. But mostly, he watched me. I could feel it. Not just the weight of his gaze, but the gentleness of it. It didn't strip me down. It wrapped around me almost protectively. Later at the hotel, I stood under the shower for too long. The water didn't rinse anything away. It just made everything more real. I dried myself slowly, wrapped a towel around my chest, and walked into the room. He was at the window, leaning on the frame, looking out. When he turned, his eyes caught mine and didn't move. There was no flicker of shame or question, just that steady, quiet intensity I was beginning to crave. I could feel the curve of my waist under the towel, the heat from the shower still clinging to my skin. For the first time in years, I was aware of myself as a woman. Not a wife, not a hostess, just me. "Are you happy with him?" he asked. I didn't answer, not because I didn't know, but because saying it aloud would make it too final, too irreversible. I turned, stepped into the second room, and sat on the edge of the bed. I didn't close the door behind me. I didn't need to. That was my answer. The silence after the trip stretched for days. I avoided being alone with him. Not overtly. I didn't barricade myself in rooms or invent errands. I simply became efficient. Left the kitchen when he entered, took longer showers, spent more time trimming hedges that didn't need trimming. I told myself it was self-preservation, a reset. That if I stepped back now, I could still claim innocence. That if nothing else happened, maybe it didn't count. But it did. It lived in my muscles, in the way my fingers twitched when I saw his shoes by the door, and how my breath caught when I heard him speak in the next room. My body had already moved toward him even if my feet stayed still. He didn't push, not once, and that made it worse. His presence was quiet, respectful, but completely aware. There was no awkwardness in him, only waiting. That kind of patience is more dangerous than pressure. It allows your own desires to echo louder in the silence. One afternoon, I passed by the living room and saw his phone on the coffee table. Screen lit up. A notification. A photo sent from a number I didn't recognize. Curiosity won. I glanced. It was me. A photo taken in the hotel in the gallery room with the ochre walls. I was laughing, one hand tucked behind my ear, head slightly tilted. He must have snapped it without me noticing. I didn't look beautiful in it. I looked alive. Underneath, he'd written, "You looked more like yourself that day than I've ever seen you look." I closed the message quickly, heart pounding. Not from fear of discovery, but from recognition. I had no memory of that moment, but I knew it was real. That night, I opened the drawer of the old dresser I never used anymore. At the bottom, beneath scarves and old stockings, lay a bra I hadn't touched in years. Lace-trimmed pale plum. The kind I used to wear when I still thought it mattered how I undressed. I put it on. It still fit, barely. But what struck me was how it felt. How I felt. More present in my own skin. It wasn't about him. Not completely. It was about remembering something I had let dissolve. The sensuality of dressing for no one but myself. The thrill of knowing what fabric brushed against my ribs under an ordinary blouse. I made tea and walked past his door without knocking. I had no plan. No script, but something in me refused to stay in the purgatory between want and fear. A few minutes later, I knocked once, a gentle, almost accidental sound. He opened the door. He didn't look surprised. He stepped back, gave me space, said nothing. The room was dim lit only by a single desk lamp that cast soft shadows across the bed and bookshelves. He didn't invite me to sit. I didn't move toward the chair. We stood there facing each other in the hush. His eyes searched mine, not with hunger, but with something heavier. A kind of ache. "I didn't mean to confuse you," he said. "You didn't," I replied. There was a long pause. Our breathing filled the air, shallow and deliberate. I could see the movement of his throat when he swallowed, the stillness in his hands. I took one step closer. He didn't touch me. He didn't need to. The space between us was unbearable in the most tender way. My body leaned forward almost imperceptibly, and for a moment our mouths hovered just inches apart. I felt the heat of his breath. The tip of my nose grazed his cheek. But I didn't kiss him. I stepped back. "Good night," I said, not breaking eye contact. Then I turned and left, closing the door behind me as softly as I could. Not because I regretted being there, but because I wasn't ready for what would happen if I stayed. He arrived in the kitchen before I did the next morning, already dressed, already moving about like nothing had shifted. He didn't glance at me when I entered. He handed me a cup of coffee without comment, and we stood on opposite ends of the counter, two figures in a choreography of denial. My husband had called the night before. His sister wasn't well, he said. He'd be staying a few extra days. Asked me to check on the roses. I told him I would. I asked if he needed anything. He said no. We exchanged kindnesses. Hung up. Neither of us mentioned the empty bed. By noon, I had pulled my favorite dress from the closet. Soft navy with a low back and short sleeves. I hadn't worn it in years. Not because it didn't fit, but because there had been no occasion worth the risk of being seen. I showered slowly, letting the water run down my spine. I shaved my legs, lotioned every inch of skin. My underwear wasn't provocative. Ivory silk, simple. But the feel of it against my hips made me stand straighter. I didn't put on perfume. I didn't need to be obvious. By the time he stepped into the room, I had set the table. Nothing elaborate, just pasta, fresh salad, a bottle of wine that had been sitting unopened for months. He hesitated when he saw me. He was wearing a button-down shirt, slightly wrinkled, as if he had changed into it at the last second. "You look different," he said, the words low, cautious. "So do you." We ate in near silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was focused, like both of us were conserving energy for something inevitable. The wine sat barely touched between us. We weren't using it as an excuse. Later, I stood at the sink rinsing a plate when he came up behind me. I felt the air change before I heard his footsteps. He didn't touch me. Not right away. He just stood close enough for me to feel the warmth of his chest behind my back. "You don't have to pretend," he said. "Not with me." I turned slowly. Our eyes locked. There was no more space for restraint, no silence wide enough to stretch between the hunger in my ribs and the certainty in his gaze. This time the kiss wasn't sudden. It was slow. His hand came to rest gently on my waist, like he was asking the question his lips already answered. My fingers touched the back of his neck, lightly, with an ache I didn't know I could still feel. The kiss deepened, not in speed, but in weight. My breath tangled with his. I felt his heart beat under my palm. It wasn't frantic. It wasn't forbidden. It was deliberate. There was no apology in how he touched me, no hesitation in how I responded. I felt the curve of my back pressed against the edge of the counter, his hand resting just above the hem of my dress. But neither of us moved beyond that. The kiss itself was the center. Everything else lived around it. Time folded. We stayed like that for minutes, or longer. I couldn't tell. Eventually I pulled away, barely. Just enough to rest my forehead against his. "I don't know what I'm doing," I whispered. "You don't have to," he said. "Just feel it." We didn't go upstairs. We didn't strip each other bare. We sat on the living room floor, backs against the couch legs stretched out in silence. My head rested lightly on his shoulder. His fingers traced lazy patterns on my arm. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. My body was still humming with the memory of his mouth, of the way he hadn't asked for permission but had waited for it all the same. Then through the stillness, we heard the sound of tires on gravel. He looked up. I sat bolt upright. Through the front window, partially hidden behind the curtains, we saw a familiar car pull slowly into the driveway. My husband had come home early. The sound of his car idling in the driveway struck like a held breath finally exhaled. For a moment we didn't move. We just stared out the window, as if by doing so, we could somehow will him to disappear, again turn the key in the ignition, and reverse out of our secret. But he didn't. The engine died. The silence afterward felt sharper than any noise. I stood slowly smoothing my dress with trembling hands. Not from panic. Panic is messy and loud. This was cleaner, sharper, like a scalpel gliding just beneath the surface of skin. He moved behind me, saying nothing, but I felt the tension radiating off him like steam from wet concrete under sunlight. But the door didn't open. Seconds passed, then minutes. I peered again through the narrow slit in the curtain. The driver's side was empty. No figure approaching the car, no one on the porch. The passenger door still closed. He didn't come in. I said, my voice quieter than I expected. "Maybe he forgot something." "Maybe he's just passing through," he replied. But his voice didn't carry belief, just a need to offer explanation. Any explanation. We waited still, but the moment never climaxed. Eventually, the car rolled back slowly and turned out of the driveway, disappearing beyond the curve of the road. He had come for something, then changed his mind. Or maybe he'd sat there watching the house and seen something in the way the curtains shifted or the lights glowed that made him pause. I'll never know what he saw, or what he thought he saw. I didn't return to the couch. I didn't look at him. I went upstairs, washed my face, brushed my teeth, changed into a nightgown with sleeves. Neutrality, an erasure of what had happened an hour earlier. The next morning was slow and silent. He avoided my eyes, and I let him. I poured coffee, folded napkins, placed everything just right, as if recreating order would disinfect what we had let unfold. By afternoon he had packed, said he needed to head back to the city, something about an upcoming project, a deadline, vague words left floating in the hallway. I didn't ask him to stay. He didn't ask if he should. We stood by the door longer than needed. He looked at me, really looked, as if memorizing the angles of my face under the hallway light. "I'm not sorry," he said. "I won't ever be." I swallowed hard, lips parted, but no words followed. He leaned forward only slightly, close enough that I could smell the faint citrus from the detergent on his collar, but he didn't kiss me. Not this time. He turned open the door and walked out into the dry golden afternoon. Hours later, I found myself sitting in the same living room where we had kissed. Everything still bore the shape of his presence, the wine glasses we never touched, the throw pillow that carried the faintest impression of his back. I reached for my phone, hesitated, then searched for his name. No message, no call, nothing to say that would lessen the ache in my ribs or fill the space he left behind. That night, I lay in bed next to a pillow that still carried my husband's scent. I wanted to feel something, guilt, regret, anger, but all I felt was rawness. Not shame, just a soft, persistent throb where my restraint used to be. By morning, I made a decision I couldn't explain to myself. I packed a small overnight bag, nothing dramatic, and took a train to the city. I told no one. I didn't even text him. I walked through streets I didn't know, past buildings that belonged to other lives, and let the anonymity wash over me like a second skin. It didn't feel like escape. It felt like confrontation. I wasn't running from something. I was walking toward the part of myself I had buried years ago under clean laundry and Sunday dinners. I found his apartment building by memory. Not address. I didn't go in. Instead, I crossed the street, found a small cafe, and sat by the window, nursing a lukewarm cup of tea while watching his building across the road. It was enough just to be near his world. Enough for now, not to knock. I returned home just before dusk. The sun stretched low across the horizon, painting the sidewalks in long amber lines. My feet hurt from the walk, not from distance, but from how tightly I'd held my body all day, like I was trying to keep something inside from spilling out. No one had noticed I was gone. No messages, no missed calls, no emergency. It was strange, how easily a person could vanish from their own life without anyone noticing. I wasn't sad about it. I was fascinated. The kind of fascination that makes you touch a bruise just to feel its shape. That evening, I put on perfume I hadn't used in 20 years. It was a sharp floral blend I used to wear on dates when we first married. Back then, it made me feel daring, like I had permission to take up space. I spritzed it lightly behind my ears across my collarbone. It didn't smell like who I was now, but like who I had been, and maybe who I still wanted to be. I didn't wear it for anyone. He wasn't there, and my husband had yet to come back from the trip to his sister's. Still, I wore it as if someone was going to lean in and remember me. When he finally did return, it was unannounced. He entered with the usual calm, placed his keys in the bowl near the door, kissed me on the cheek with the same distracted affection he always offered. But then a pause. He leaned back slightly, sniffed the air gently. "You're wearing that old perfume," he said. I nodded casual. Found the bottle. Thought I'd wear it again. He looked at me. Really looked for the first time in weeks. Not with suspicion, at least not yet, but with something between curiosity and uncertainty, as if trying to recall whether I'd worn it recently for someone else. I turned away before he could decide. That night we had dinner together. Polite conversation. The kind of measured silence that's built on years of living around each other without digging too deeply. I asked about his sister. He gave me a vague update, followed by a question that felt almost too casual. "He's still here." "The boy left a few days ago," I said. I didn't flinch, said he had work. He nodded, took another bite of chicken, said nothing. After dinner, I stepped outside with a glass of wine, sat on the back porch as the sky turned bruised and purple. I heard him moving inside, closing cupboards, rinsing plates, life resuming its shape. But I wasn't in it the same way anymore. A message came through on my phone. One word. Still. I stared at it. Heart thudding. Still wanting you. Still remembering. Still burning. I didn't answer. The next morning, the house filled with voices. Guests arriving for my husband's birthday. Family, neighbors, a few colleagues from his office. The kind of gathering that looked effortless on the outside, but required careful choreography beneath the surface. I played my part, smiling in the kitchen, topping off wine glasses, nodding at jokes I'd heard 3 times before. Then I turned. And there he was, standing near the entryway, in a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled up, his jaw slightly clenched, like he hadn't meant to show up, but couldn't stay away. I hadn't known he would be there. No one told me. He must have come through someone's invitation, maybe thinking I'd be gone, maybe hoping I'd be there. Our eyes met across the crowd. It lasted a breath too long. He didn't smile, neither did I. But something passed between us anyway. An agreement. A wound reopening. Later in the hallway, we passed each other's shoulders, brushing slightly. "I never stopped," he said under his breath. Neither did I. I replied, my voice barely audible. We didn't touch, but we didn't need to. Every nerve in my body had already turned toward him again. The days that followed felt like walking through water. Everything slower, thicker, saturated with weight I couldn't shake. He was gone again, back to the city after the party. And yet he wasn't. His presence clung to the walls, to the sofa cushions, to the back of my throat. I didn't clean the hallway mirror he leaned against during the gathering. I didn't wash the wine glass he used. I left them where they were, not as tokens, but as proof that I hadn't dreamed it. My husband had grown quieter since the party. Not in the deliberate way people become distant, but in the way someone starts reading between lines they didn't know existed. He didn't ask questions, but his pauses became longer. His eyes lingered more. And there were moments, fleeting, subtle. When I caught him looking at me like I was a puzzle he once thought he'd solved. One evening he came home with a small black box. I assumed it was something for work. A gadget, perhaps, or a part for the garden hose. But when he placed it in front of me at the kitchen table and said nothing, I opened it with a strange, shallow breath. Inside were earrings. Delicate gold with tiny emeralds. Nothing extravagant, but clearly chosen with care. I couldn't remember the last time he'd given me jewelry without a holiday prompting it. "You used to wear green," he said. "It always suited you." I stared at the earrings for longer than I should have. He thought he was being kind. Thought this was a gesture, an unspoken offering of closeness. And maybe it was. But all I could feel was the weight of them in my hands. The way they gleamed in the light like an apology for something he hadn't even realized had happened. I put them on that night. Not out of sentiment, but out of a need to feel the contrast. The hard, cold metal brushing against the heat beneath my skin. Later, I sat alone in the living room, a photo album on my lap. I hadn't opened it in years. Pages filled with images of us. Vacations, birthdays, the mundane magic of domestic life. My hand hovered over one photo. Me sitting in the backyard, eyes closed, sun hitting my face. I looked peaceful, but not alive. I flipped the page. There, tucked between 2 prints, was the photo he had taken of me at the gallery, the one he had sent. My real laugh, mid-breath, unguarded. It didn't belong in the album yet, there it was. He must have slipped it in before the party. I held it in my hands, unable to look away. The next day, I walked into the bedroom while my husband was shaving. He turned, met my eyes in the mirror. His face was neutral, unreadable, but the tension in his shoulders betrayed him. "You've been distant," he said quietly. "I've been somewhere else in my head," I replied, which was the closest I could get to honesty without bleeding. He nodded, rinsed his razor. "Is it me?" I wanted to lie. Wanted to say no, but I didn't. "I don't know," I said, and that answer landed in the room like dust, soft, but everywhere. That evening I received a message again. It wasn't a mistake. It was you. 8 words enough to set every nerve on fire. I didn't reply. Instead, I stood by the window, earrings still cold against my earlobes, and watched the dusk creep slowly into the edges of the sky. I didn't cry, not because it didn't hurt, but because the ache had become familiar, almost welcome, like the breath just before a confession. The morning was unusually still. No breeze, no birdsong. Even the trees seemed frozen, as if the entire world was holding its breath. I moved through the house like a shadow, light, careful, present in every room, but never staying long in any of them. I had made my decision days before, though it didn't come in the form of a single moment or epiphany. It came slowly, like water through soil. No drama, no slam doors, just a quiet reckoning with the life I had built and the parts of myself I had abandoned in the process. I didn't tell my husband. There was nothing to confess that could be said out loud without unraveling the fabric of what we had shared all these years. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't distant. He was simply consistent, like a house that never changes, no matter how many times you rearrange the furniture. And maybe I had needed that once, but not anymore. He left for work that morning without ceremony. A kiss on the cheek, a comment about a meeting later in the day. I nodded, poured his coffee, and watched him walk to the car through the kitchen window. His figure receded into the haze of morning light. Familiar, solid, and yet not enough. I went upstairs, stood before the mirror in our bedroom, and looked at myself the way he hadn't in years. Not with critique, not with expectation, just looked. I wasn't trying to feel beautiful. I was trying to feel real. The earrings were still there. I removed them gently one by one and placed them back in the box. Not out of rejection, but out of closure. He had tried, in his way. But you can't return to someone who never noticed you were gone. I opened the closet and pulled out the dress I'd worn on the day of the gallery trip. I didn't put it on. I just held it against me, pressing the fabric to my chest, breathing in the faint trace of his cologne still clinging to the hem. There was no message from him that morning. No still, no come, just silence. And yet I felt him everywhere, not like a ghost, but like something I had carried with me stitched into the lining of my thoughts. I sat on the porch for hours. The sun moved across the sky in slow arcs, painting the yard in shifting patterns of light and shadow. I watched neighbors come and go, a delivery truck passed children riding bikes on the far corner. Life continued, oblivious, indifferent. Eventually, I stood, walked inside, and opened the bottom drawer of the writing desk. There, between tax forms and old postcards, lay my sketchbook. I hadn't touched it in over a decade. The pages were stiff with disuse, the pencil marks faint with age. But they were mine. I flipped through drawings I barely remembered making. Still lifes, city streets, unfinished faces. Then I turned to a blank page and pressed the pencil against it. My hand shook at first, unfamiliar with the movement, but the lines came anyway, slowly, then faster. Shapes, curves, textures. Not perfect, not even good, but mine. When I stopped, the sky outside had turned a deep indigo. The house was quiet. My hands were smudged with graphite. And for the first time in what felt like years, I felt something close to peace. I didn't need to leave my husband. I didn't need to chase a man whose touch had awakened something I hadn't realized was asleep. I just needed to stop pretending I was nothing more than the role I played in this house. He had seen me, truly seen me, and I had let him. That couldn't be undone, but it didn't have to be continued either. When my husband came home, I was at the stove stirring something fragrant and simple. He kissed the back of my neck, and I didn't pull away, but I didn't lean into him either. That night, after he fell asleep, I stood in front of the mirror one last time, not to check for lines or shadows, but to meet my own gaze. I was still here, and that would be enough.